Good evening. Every human life is a force in this world. Our influence pours out perpetually. The tiniest newborn influences busy or sleeping adults. Hopefully that influence stirs those adults to feed and care for the child. However, if those human adults refuse and turn a deaf ear to that need, rejection, not care, becomes a predominant influence on the child. So our response as humans to the most helpless human beings exposes who we are. Over time, the habituated response of the adult shapes both the adult who is practicing neglect and the little one who is neglected. Both are bent in a particular direction due to the choice of the one with the greater power. The vulnerability of the baby exposes the heart of the adult. This is a critical principle as we consider power, both its use and its misuse. Power is simply the ability to do something, the capacity to influence, to master, to dominate. Every single human being has power. Power is inherent in being human, and it can be used for good or evil. In Genesis, we read that God invested humans with power. He said, let's make man in our likeness and let them rule. He told them to be fruitful and to rule and subdue. Rule and subdue are power words. And the Hebrew means things like to dominate or to conquer, to keep under. Note, in the beginning, the ruling and subduing were not of each other, but of the earth and its creatures. God created humans in his own image. Power was given to humans who at that time reflected the image of God in every way. So what do we know about him? He is good. He is holy. He is faithful. He is a refuge. He is truth. He is love. Power was given to humans who reflected the character of God. And we are told that the God of all power blessed them and used his power to pronounce a benediction over them. Well, we all know what happened after that, right? A deceptively beautiful creature who had utterly rejected the power of God came and deceived the humans using God's own words. You want to be like God? You can do that by choosing what he has denied you. And mirroring the enemy, the humans used their power to choose against God and took what appeared good and fed on it. They used their power to choose evil when that power should have been used to choose good. Power used by those who bore the character of God became power used by those who bore a likeness to the enemy of God. That power is not power used to bless, but to harm, not just others, but the self as well. The issues of power and deception have become frequent topics today. We hear about power and its abuse by individuals, within families, and within churches. We hear about deception and cover-ups by large institutions, organizations, and churches. Throughout my 45 years of clinical work, I have sat with men and women who have been sexually abused as children and many assaulted as adults. I have worked with domestic violence, clergy sexual abuse, sex trafficking, and victims of other kinds of violence, like kidnapping, torture, genocide, and war. I have also worked with Christian leadership. Many, of course, have come for things like burnout and depression and difficult matters in their churches. But grievously others, pastors, missionaries, elders, heads of Christian organizations, called by God to use their power to bless, have instead controlled the intellects, hearts, and sex lives of their sheep. using the sheep as food for themselves rather than feeding the sheep God called them to serve. Others use power to silence or to cover up such abuses, theoretically for the sake of God's work. In other words, they have withheld using their power for good because of the fear of exposure and self-protection. Needless to say, I have seen untold damage done to the body of Jesus Christ, often in his name. It is for the sake of that body and that wonderful name that I believe we need to wrestle with the issues of power and its abuses. We cannot, of course, talk about power without also discussing its flip side, which is vulnerability. When somebody is vulnerable, it simply means they're susceptible to attack or injury. The word vulnerable comes from the Latin, and it means to wound. A woman in a room full of men is physically vulnerable. A client in a counselor's office is vulnerable. A parishioner in a pastor's office, a patient in a doctor's office, a child with a parent. Whenever power is used in a way that wounds the vulnerable, that exploits trust, abuse has occurred. The word abuse simply means to use wrongly. So when a person with power uses another for his or her own ends, it is abuse. The shepherd has used the sheep for food. Power is not always a felt thing. You can be very powerful and not feel that way. And it changes with context. So you can have great power in one arena and in a different one, not so much. It's also true that there are many kinds of power. One kind of power, of course, is physical. If you're big and strong, you have physical power. Another is verbal. People who have a command of words can dominate a conversation, a room, a relationship, a group, or a nation. We often use words to sway others toward what we want. We use words to influence, to shape, to encourage. We use words to humiliate, to deceive, to maneuver. Words have the power to move large numbers of people. You think of the power of Martin Luther King and the tremendous influence his words had for good. You think of the power of Adolf Hitler's words and the influence he had on people for evil. You think of the times when you abused words to titillate, to condemn, to coerce, because it met some need in yourself. And you think of other times when you have used words to give affirmation or hope. Verbal power is a tremendous power, and most of us in this profession have it. A third kind of power is emotional power. Spouses have this, parents and children. I have emotional power over my clients. And we've all known people who exercise their emotional power by moodiness, yes? You have to walk on eggshells to prevent a particular mood from descending. Preachers can use emotional power to sway church members for good or ill. When emotional power and verbal power are combined in ways that speak to the longings of people's hearts, the force is very powerful. Knowledge, skill, and intellect also bring power. If I'm smarter, or if I have more skill, then I have more power in those arenas. Those with theological knowledge have theological power. It is assumed that they have the right to tell us what is true about God. The power of a pastor in the theological realm is intensified by the fact that many see him as speaking for God. Indeed, he may tell them he is doing exactly that. So the pastor says, you go home and live with the man who is battering you and try to love him better. And you know what she says? She says, okay. She trusts that he knows what God thinks about her life. Many of us experience this imbalance of power when we're sick, and the physician not only gets to tell us what's wrong, but what to do about it. It's a very vulnerable feeling. And we trust those with knowledge and skill, assuming that their character is trustworthy. Think Larry Nassar. There's also power of position, president, CEO, pastor, therapist. It also extends to reputation or status. Those who are labeled by others as brilliant or godly or successful are accorded power simply by virtue of their reputations. And they can walk into a room, and because of that reputation, people give their words and actions a certain weight without waiting to look for integrity of character. They assume it. It is critical to note that many kinds of power can be combined in one person. Position, physical presence, verbal skill, knowledge, and the capacity to sway human beings is a phenomenal combination. And we, again, assume such powers indicate character. They do not.